Dive Podcast. Straight talk on politics, national security, and America's future. With Robert Johnson and Linda Miller. We cut through the spin, tackle the tough issues, and give you the real story behind today's headlines. Subscribe now and hit the notification bell to stay informed. Welcome to the Deep Dive. We're here to break down complex global events and pull out the key pieces of information.
And today, it's quite a mix. We're looking at everything from nuclear materials gone missing to some pretty sharp diplomatic words being thrown around.
Yeah, a lot happening on the international stage. So let's dive right in and try to connect these dots. First up, Iran. There's this, significant mystery surrounding its nuclear program now, something the IAEA inspectors are grappling with.
That's right. It seems that after those recent attacks on Iranian nuclear sites, attacks linked to Israel and the U.S., the IAEA, the International Atomic Energy Agency, they've confirmed they can't track a large amount of enriched uranium anymore.
How much are we talking about?
Around 400 kilograms.
400 kilograms. And this isn't just any uranium, right? It's enriched to 60%.
Exactly, 60%, which is, a pretty big step towards weapons grade. Not quite there, but much closer than the levels allowed under the old nuclear deal.
So what does that quantity, 400 kilograms at 60%, actually translate to in practical terms?
Well, the IAEA's estimate is stark. They figure it's enough material to potentially create at least 9 nuclear warheads.
9. Okay. That definitely puts the missing material into perspective. So how did they lose track? What are the theories about where it went?
The head of the IAEA himself said that after those strikes, June 13th and 22nd, their experts just lost the ability to monitor it. The visibility was gone.
And the theories?
One idea floating around among officials is that the bombings might have provided, ideal cover, as they put it.
Ideal cover for Iran, too.
To hide the uranium stockpiles. To move them somewhere the IAEA couldn't see, taking advantage of the chaos.
But Iran has a different story, don't they?
They do. Hassan Abedini, the deputy director of radio and television in Iran, he stated that Iran actually evacuated 3 nuclear facilities before the attack.
Four?
Yeah, moved the enriched uranium sometime earlier, he said, claiming there was no risk of radiation release because, the material wasn't there when the strikes hit.
Okay, but then you have U.S. President Trump weighing in.
Right. And he directly contradicted that, said the Iranians moved nothing. He argued that moving that much material would be very, very hard, especially without knowing the attacks were coming. A direct challenge to Tehran's account.
So these conflicting stories, what does this mean for, accountability for the IAEA's job?
It's a huge problem. The IAEA chief insists Iran has to show where the uranium is. They signed the Non-Proliferation Treaty, after all.
But can they enforce that?
That's the challenge. Monitoring Iran was already tough, even before this. One observer called it a cat-and-mouse game for a while now.
A cat-and-mouse game?
Yeah. And this incident just makes that verification job significantly harder. There's a real gap now in knowing what Iran possesses.
And even with the U.S. claiming destruction of main sites, Iran might still be able to rebuild.
That's the belief. They likely still have the know-how, the capabilities. They could probably resume enrichment within months, even if specific facilities were damaged. The knowledge doesn't just disappear.
Okay, let's shift from nuclear material to words. The rhetoric between leaders has also been pretty intense lately.
Oh, definitely. Some very sharp language. Take Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov. He basically said French President Macron and Germany's Friedrich Merz have finally lost their common sense.
Strong words. What prompted that?
He accused them of trying to go back to times when France and Germany wanted to, quote, conquer all of Europe, even referencing the Russian Empire and the Soviet Union. Very pointed historical comparisons.
And this was a reaction to something specific, they said.
Yes, it stemmed from a joint article Macron and Merz wrote. In it, they argued Europe needs to arm itself, called Russia the main threat, and accused Moscow of waging imperialistic wars.
Namely Georgia, Crimea, Donbass, Ukraine.
Exactly. Listing those conflicts, Lavrov seemed particularly angered by Merz comparing the current situation to appeasing Hitler in the 1930s.
That's a heavy comparison.
Very. Lavrov called it especially unacceptable. He then made a counterpoint, noting that even during Nazi invasions, there weren't bans on German language or culture, implying Russia is facing something unprecedented today. It's using history as a weapon, really.
And staying with Russia, Dmitry Peskov, the presidential press secretary, also had a strong warning about intervention.
A very strong warning. He stated flat out that no country or group of countries should try to decide who leads another nation.
And the consequence.
He warned that kind of action would make the world go to hell. a blunt rejection of any notion of externally imposed regime change.
And the timing of that statement is interesting, coming after the recent Israel-Iran conflict.
Right, that 12-day conflict where the U.S. intervened on June 22nd, that period saw some really remarkable claims.
Like U.S. President Trump saying he saved Khamenei.
Exactly. U.S. President Trump claimed he saved the Iranian Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei from a terrible and disgraceful death. Around the same time, it was reported Khamenei was in a bunker and had even named potential successors.
Which suggests the threat felt very real inside Iran.
It certainly implies that. And U.S. President Trump's statement positions the U.S. as having held Khamenei's fate in its hands, in a way.
How did Iran respond to that particular claim?
The Iranian Foreign Minister, Abbas Araqi, responded directly to U.S. President Trump. He said the U.S. president needs to change his disrespectful and condescending tone towards the Supreme Leader.
Especially if he wants a nuclear deal.
Precisely. Araqi added that if the tone doesn't change, Iran will not hesitate to reveal its real capabilities. It's basically saying, show respect or face the consequences, a clear warning.
Okay, let's pivot again. Economic pressure. Sanctions. How is that playing out, particularly between the U.S. and Russia?
Well, there's been a significant move. U.S. President Trump decided to back a new Russia sanctions bill.
The one authored by Senator Lindsey Graham.
That's the one. Graham himself said the decision came after he played golf with U.S. President Trump. Gives you a sense of how some of these policy moves might come about.
And the core of this bill is pretty aggressive, isn't it? A 500% tariff.
Massive. A 500% tariff on goods from countries that buy Russian oil and aren't seen as actively supporting Ukraine.
Which countries are potentially in the crosshairs?
India and China were specifically mentioned, given their ongoing purchases of Russian oil and gas. The bill apparently has wide support in the Senate, 84 senators, and is expected to move forward after their July break.
Wow. That could really shake things up globally if it passes.
Yeah.
How does Russia view these kinds of measures?
Lavrov, again, calls them dictates and punishments. He frames them as Western tools to punish anyone who doesn't fall in line.
And argues they harm the global economy.
Exactly. He says they haven't helped the global economy function smoothly, essentially that they're counterproductive and coercive.
Meanwhile, Ukraine is pushing for even tougher sanctions.
Yes, Ukraine's Foreign Minister, Andrei Sybiga, wants corresponding sanction steps against the big buyers of Russian oil. He's urging allies to use their full sanction potential. They want the financial screws tightened further.
And the EU is also considering more.
They are. They're discussing their 18th sanctions package. Ideas include lowering the oil price cap, maybe down to $45 a barrel from $60.
That would cut deeper into Russia's revenue.
Potentially, yes. They're also looking at banning transactions related to Nord Stream pipelines and targeting banks involved in skirting existing sanctions, trying to close loopholes.
Amidst all this pressure, though, is there any sign of diplomatic engagement between Russia and the U.S.?
There are some signals. Russian presidential aide Yuri Ushakov said Moscow is waiting for a signal from the U.S. State Department to restart talks on diplomatic irritants.
Irritants, like specific points of friction.
Presumably, yes.
Yeah.
He mentioned the U.S. had asked to postpone the last round of these talks, so Russia's saying the ball is in the U.S. court to resume them.
Ushakov also commented on the tone of discussions, didn't he?
He did. He described recent contacts with the current U.S. administration as having a friendly, partnership-oriented tone.
But friendly, partnership-oriented, even with everything else going on.
That's what he said, adding that, radical shifts haven't happened yet, but the tone is different, maybe suggesting a potential opening, however small.
Interesting. And did he mention prospects for a face-to-face meeting between Russian President Putin and U.S. President Trump?
He outlined two ways it could happen. One, a carefully prepared meeting with documents and clear goals, which he said Russia prefers for effectiveness.
Meaning they want substance.
Seems so. Or, he said, it could be a more spontaneous, let's just meet and talk kind of thing.
In a possible venue.
He floated the idea of the 80th UN anniversary in New York as a potential occasion. It shows they're thinking about logistics, at least.
And they have been talking on the phone this year, right?
Yes. 4 calls, reportedly. The latest on June 14th covered the Middle East escalation and Ukraine. So communication lines at some level remain open despite the tensions.
So wrapping this up, we've seen missing nuclear material, sharp words flying between world leaders, escalating sanctions. It's a tangled web.
It really is. Each piece impacts the others. The uncertainty in Iran, the tough talk, the economic pressure, it all feeds into this picture of a very strained international environment.
It definitely leaves you wondering, In a world that feels increasingly divided, where trust seems low, what's next? Will these pressures force some kind of real dialogue or just push things further towards conflict? It's hard to say.
Definitely something we'll need to keep watching closely.
Subscribe to our podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube. We are here to make things clear. New episodes every day.